Good day, Junior Tuckies, and welcome to this theory video that deals with organic chemistry, some of the basics that we're going to get to know now in grade 10. My name is Mr. P, and I'm going to be taking you through this section. So the first thing for us to know is that when we look at these organic molecules that we're going to be dealing with now, particularly proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, when we get these molecules in through our diet, they are very, very big. Okay, and then it's up to our digestive system or the digestive process to break these molecules down into the small, simple, soluble molecules that the body needs to absorb. Okay, in order to do that, these components, or the components of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, need to be in their monomer form. That means we need to see them or have them in their most simplest of units. When we look at protein, this means that the simple units of the amino acids are going to be absorbed into the body. When we look at carbohydrate, the monosaccharides, or the very, very simple sugars, will be absorbed into the body, and an example here would be glucose. If we look at fats, they're broken down into their monomers, where the base monomer is the glycerol, and we have 3 fatty acids. And it's these monomers that are absorbed by the body. And remember, these are very simple molecules. If we look at these 3, they are our organic molecules or organic compounds because of their chemical structure. Vitamins also fall into this category, but we're going to be focusing our attention now on the proteins, the carbohydrates, and the fats. So if we look at these compounds, these organic compounds, they are made up of carbons, of hydrogens, and of oxygens. Okay, and carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens are components of carbohydrates and fats. When we look at proteins, we have the addition of nitrogen. Okay, so our nitrogen molecule, our protein molecules have the added nitrogen bonds. If we look at carbohydrates specifically, carbohydrates have a very, very unique ratio of carbons to hydrogens to oxygens. And when simplified, that is a 1-to-1 ratio. If we look at fats, although carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens make up fats as well, their ratio is different. An example here would be glucose with a ratio of 6:12:6. And this can be simplified as our 1:2:1. Okay, moving on to a focus on carbohydrate quickly. Looking at plants and animals, plants specifically are autotrophic organisms, which means they manufacture their own food. When compared to animals, this isn't true. Animals would get their nutrition from either plants or other animals, depending on the type of consumer that it is. Being autotrophic means they use the process of photosynthesis, if they are phototrophic organisms, to make their sugars. Now, their sugars, being glucose, are stored within the plant structure as starch, which is a complex carbohydrate. If we look a little bit further, the plants use this complex carbohydrate, they restructure it, and they use it as cellulose. So plants need the glucose that they manufacture through photosynthesis for energy, but also as the structural components of their cells. In the case of the cell walls, which utilize cellulose for the strength of that structure. When we look at animals, they're heterotrophic. Like I said before, they get their energy from other organisms. This is through digestion. So in other words, these large macromolecules need to be broken down so that they can be absorbed by the animal's body. When glucose is taken in by the animal, it is also stored, or excess glucose is also stored, but as glycogen, whereas in plants, that excess glucose is stored as starch. Glycogen is also a polysaccharide, or a more complex molecule when compared to glucose. But it is a little bit different to the starch. When looking at protein, there have been 22 different amino acids identified, but we know that there are so many different proteins available out there. When these amino acids are combined in different combinations, in other words, we take those 22 and we reorder them and we create these long polypeptide chains, we form the different proteins that we find in the body. Okay, The polypeptides are proteins that can be sensitive to both temperature and pH, which is the acidity in their environments. Now, this is an important concept to understand, which means that because proteins are functioning within the body as either some hormones or enzymes, if these hormones or enzymes are exposed to environmental conditions where the temperature is either too high or too low, or the pH or the acidity is too high or too low, they're not going to be able to function correctly. Okay. The purpose of proteins in the animal cell or the animal body is for the repair of damaged tissue. This is true for plants as well. The growth of cells and tissues. And then, as I said before, they're functional proteins like enzymes and hormones. And they are definitely going to be susceptible to changes in their environmental conditions, which could change their shape. And we refer to this change in shape that causes this inactivation in order for them to do the function that they are meant to do as them being denatured, or they become denatured proteins. If we look at lipids, an example of which here we look at as a triglyceride. Now this is a combination of my glycerol with those fatty acids once again. So you can see there my glycerol being the base monomer in this chemical molecule is attached to 3 fatty acids. And those joins, or those bonds that exist between the glycerol and the fatty acid molecules, are very high energy bonds. So when we get to a point where the body is in need of some reserve energy, it is possible for these fatty acids and the glycerol molecules to separate, and when they separate from each other, in other words, those bonds break, there is a very high energy release in the body. When it comes to saturated or unsaturated fats, our unsaturated fats are the more healthy, and this just relates to how many hydrogens are actually bonded to the carbons in the fatty acid tails of this triglyceride molecule. Some tips to remember when it comes to this section particularly is to know how to draw these molecules. When we're drawing a triglyceride molecule, we will need to know how to draw this, and we will need to know how to label it. Functions of lipids include things like, as I said, reserve energy sources. There's cushioning and insulation for the body. So cushioning of organs against impact, insulation under the skin against cold, and one of the biggest functions of lipids is the fact that they are the structural components of all cells in the cell membranes. Thank you so much for joining me for this video, this theory video on some basics around organic chemistry. I do hope that you have learned something and that it has been valuable listening. Do join us for some of the other videos in this section. Make sure you get your hands on the worksheet and the answer book, as well as the theory booklet to help you prepare for this section in your grade 10 life sciences year. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.